Hello, everyone. My name is Father John Robinson, and about a week ago, Miss Natalie asked me to say a few words in a video about the founding of John Paul II Junior College, which I, Mr. David, and others were involved in. I'd like to give a little overview, perhaps, of the way we see education. And of course, education for us is an apostolate of the Catholic Church. And so we want to see the Catholic Church as the umbrella over all the apostolates. And so we can start there. What is the purpose of the Catholic Church? Well, we know it's to bring people to heaven. It's to bring people into communion with God, to true happiness. That's the ultimate purpose of everything the church does. And so the church has different apostolates. So we can think of, for example, hospitals. The church has hospitals throughout the world. What's the purpose of a hospital? Well, it's to help people to be healthy, because we want to have health of the body. It's important. Hospitals focus on that aspect of our humanity, of health. Bring people who are sick to health. They might have a better life. But ultimately, that's to bring them into communion with God. The church serves the poor all over the world. Why? Because it's very hard to live out our humanity and to come into really communion with God when all we can think of is how we're going to feed ourselves because we're hungry. And so the world, the church rather, wants to help to bring everyone into or out of that destitute poverty, where we don't have enough to eat, we don't have a good roof over our heads. So the church is very interested in that as well. The church, for example, has monasteries. And if we think of what the purpose of a monastery is, well, I would say the purpose of a monastery, if we think about it, is prayer. I mean, that's what you do in a monastery. You do other things, like the monks study, for example, and they work. But if you take prayer out, then you kind of lost your reason for existing. Okay, so those are some of the apostles of the Catholic Church. Another apostle of the Catholic Church is education. And that's what we want to focus on here today, is education. And again, because it's under the umbrella of the entire church, it has one goal, and that's heaven. That's union with God. That's salvation. That's something in common with all the apostles of the church, and that's something that we're going to have in common as well. I always remember one of the volunteers asked Father John McHugh, who founded Mount Carmel High School, and was really had the idea of someday having a junior college as well, or a college. And someone asked him, one of the volunteers asked, what's the purpose of, what are we trying to do at Mount Carmel? What's the ultimate end? And he said in his own simple way, save souls, make saints. Two different ways of saying the same thing. And so we don't want to lose that aspect because that's part of every single apostle of the church, including education. However, education deals with a specific aspect of our humanity. And when we talk about education, we are talking about something specific. We are focusing in on the mind of the person, which is a spiritual reality, right? But it's the mind, the intellect. We're forming the intellect first and foremost. That has to be the very purpose or the very focus of education. Now, I want to use an image that I remember. Some of you may have heard of Dr. Robert Carlson. Dr. Robert Carlson was the founder of Wyoming Catholic, or one of the three founders of Wyoming Catholic College a number of years ago, probably like 20 years now. And he came down to Belize, actually, to give us some pointers. He was a good friend of my dad's, and a good friend of mine. I lived with him for a while when I was a young guy in his family. And so I knew him well, and he agreed to come down to Belize to give us some pointers as we began our endeavor of founding a college. And I remember the image that he used, and it was an image from Yeats' poem, The Second Coming. And I'm not going to get into the poem or the meaning of what Yeats meant by these different images, but rather to extract the image that he uses for our own purposes. And so, taking this image that Yeats gives us of the falconer and the falcon. And of course, the falcon will circle around the falconer in this large gyre, but it has to stay within the distance of the falconer's voice so it can keep the center. Otherwise, what happens? The falcon can go off and get lost and never come back, and then everything is lost. And so this is an image that I would like to think about or use to explain how we see education, and in a sense, what has happened to education to a large extent, and the reason then that we thought it necessary to open up our own junior college. It's sort of caught up in this image. Then we think, even though there are other colleges around close by, that this is something that has happened to a large extent, especially in tertiary education, but in other areas as well of education, but especially tertiary, where the center has been lost, and we'll come back to that in just a second. But when you lose the center, you kind of go, you wander out into never land, and everything is lost, and near anarchy reigns upon the world. And to a large extent, I would say this is what's happened in so many universities today. And so for us, it was important to try to do something very different, to make sure that we knew what that center was, and to make sure everything revolved around that center. So, rhetorical question, what is that center in education? What is the center around which everything else then revolves? And if we lose that center, then we're in trouble. Okay, so what is the center? Very important question. What is the center when we're speaking about education? Maybe you've come up with your conclusion already. Hopefully. What is that center that is so important? And if we lose the center, we've lost everything. So hold on to that image for a moment in your minds, okay? What is the center of education? What is it that holds everything together? Holding on to that image for just a moment. Think about hunger. When we're hungry, what do we crave? Easy one, right? We need food. Our stomachs become hungry. We know to satisfy the hunger, we need food. We already said that education is principally concerned, not only concerned, but principally concerned with the intellect. What do our minds crave? What are we seeking when we study? Truth, right? Truth is the center. Truth is the purpose. Truth is the reason for the existence of a university. It's the seeking of the truth. And this is what holds everything else all together. So, what are we looking for when we study biology? We're looking for the truth about biology. What are we looking for when we study history? We're looking for the truth. What are we looking for when we're studying philosophy? Truth. Theology? Truth. You see, truth is the center which holds everything else together in all these different disciplines. And so when we lose the notion of what we're looking for, that we're seeking truth, and truth holds all things together, then we've lost the center. Then we begin to spiral out of control. And unfortunately, this is what has seemed to happen in many places. The truth itself is called into question. Veritas. What's that? No? What is truth? When we lose that, then we're in trouble. So that is at the center of John Paul II Junior College. It's the sincere search for and finding of the truth. Okay, I would say there are two main ways in which we can arrive at the truth, at least originally. No? So there are two methods that are used today. The first method that you would all be more familiar, or I would say most people are familiar with today, and which are used in most universities, is the inductive method, which is a good method. It's a scientific method. It begins with particulars, and it ends up making a universal claim. And due to the inductive method, we've had all kinds of advances in the sciences in the last few centuries. And so it's a good method, and we can arrive at truth from this method. The certainty of the truth is not the same as in the deductive method, which I'll get to in a second. And I'll just give an example. This would be why, for example, you would always want to have the latest biology textbook. You don't want a 40-year-old biology textbook or even a 40-year-old chemistry textbook. Why? Because we're studying particulars. We're coming to universal conclusions, but then the more information we get, the more we have to modify those universal claims that we had. And so it's not that they can't be accurate, but the certainty of them is always sort of open to new evidence. And that's a good thing. So can we come to the truth? Yes. But what's the degree of certainty of that truth? Well, we always want to be open in science to new evidence. So that's one method probably everyone is very familiar with. The other method is the deductive method. The deductive method begins with universals. And from the universals then knows all the particulars. And it's a reasoning, so you begin with a premise, and you, through logical reasoning, you come to a conclusion. And this is another way of coming to the truth, and it's more certain than the inductive method, although it studies different things in a different way. The problem today is that the deductive method is in large part been ignored or called into question or outright thrown out by many of the tertiary education, the universities of today. And this is a great error, because through the deductive method we come to great truths that we can't arrive at through the inductive method. And so John Paul II has made the choice to focus in on the deductive method of learning. So, and this is difficult, because we live in a world that doesn't really, or at least looks upon the deductive mode of learning with great suspicion. But we need it desperately. We need this mode of thinking, correct thinking, and bringing people to real wisdom. And that's why we can say at John Paul II, we teach you not what to think, but how to think. Yes, there is a correct way of thinking. So you begin with a premise, and you have to follow these logical arguments to come to a conclusion. It's not just, it just popped into my mind and I said it. And that's what happens with people's opinions and things like that. So that's what we want to bring our students to be able to think in a logical way, especially the deductive method. We're not against the inductive method. We're not against the scientific method in any way. But everyone else is doing that to the exclusion of the deductive method. And so we've embraced liberal arts and more the deductive method. That being true, it's also important to know that most of the time when we learn things, we learn truth, we don't come to those truths by either method, right? Originally, yes, they were arrived at through these different methods, perhaps, but how do we come to what we know? Well, through faith. Not necessarily faith with a big F, right? But faith with a small f. We believe, no? So when my 5th grade teacher told me that Christopher Columbus discovered America in 1492, I believed her at the time. No? And we can go through a whole litany of things that we have believed. We trust our teachers. We trust those people in authority that tell us these things. And that's good. That's the way we learn 99% of the things that we learn. We wouldn't get very far if we had to learn everything through one of these two methods. as humanity, yes, as the big human family, yes, we have to learn these things through these methods, but then they can be passed on. And so what a university is to do, not only to teach these methods, but also to pass on the wisdom that has been accumulated through these methods. And that's one of the reasons why, okay, so we've had this discussion about theology. So theology uses the deductive method to arrive at its conclusions. However, most of what we would learn in theology, again, we learn because we are taught. We receive in faith or believe that which is being proposed to us. And yes, it's important to sometimes pick out some of those things that we are teaching and show how they are logical, how they're backed up by reasoning. But if we tried to do that with every single thing, we wouldn't get very far. No? And so that's why, yes, we can teach the catechism of the Catholic Church in theology. And yes, it is part of theology. To say that it's not would be in some way like telling a student studying medicine that memorizing the different diseases and their cures is not really studying medicine. Yes, it is. No, yes, it is. You don't have to rediscover the wheel every time that you want to learn something. Most of the things that we learn are learned by passing on this wisdom and knowledge. But yes, they are backed up. We see in Thomas Aquinas, especially in his Summa, how he did go through this, methodically go through so many different arguments and comes to this beautiful truth. And so we have those. We have those in our suitcase. All those arguments, and they're good arguments, they're awesome arguments. But we don't have to bring our students through every single one of St. Thomas's arguments to be able to teach them theology. In fact, we couldn't. St. Thomas is the angelic doctor. He's had an intellect perhaps matched by no one, or at least very few people who've ever lived. And so we can't expect our students or even ourselves to be at that same level. However, we know it's there, and we want to bring our students to be familiar with that. But not that everything they learn is through the deductive method. Most of what we learn is through faith, is through accepting what we've been taught, because we trust our teachers. That's why it's important for teachers to always keep in mind your purpose, and that is, as teachers, we never forget this, that our duty is to bring our students to the truth in whatever subject we've been entrusted with. That is the true purpose of the teacher. It's not simply to sort of wander about in mindless arguments. That can happen sometimes. If you want space cadets, go to NASA. We want people who are seeking and finding the truth at all these different levels. And so it's so important for the teacher to be in love with what he's teaching. When we're in love with the truth, then that love is contagious, and we bring our students to that same love. And that's the objective, is to bring the students to the truth. They'll embrace the learning when they're satisfied, because they're being filled with what is true. And I want to say a couple words about the truth itself. So what is truth? So I mentioned that earlier. And the best sort of philosophical definition of truth that I've heard is that truth is an equation. So on the one hand, we have reality, and the other hand, we have our minds. And the more equal these two things are, the more our mind is conformed to reality, the more we possess truth, small t. Now, if we jump into theology and Revelation, we know that Jesus has said, I am the way and the truth and the life. So how do those things connect? Well, I would say that Jesus, being the Son of God, stands on the other side of reality. In other words, his mind doesn't have to conform to reality. Reality comes forth from his mind. Reality has conformed or is conformed to his mind. And so when we come to truth, even small truths in geology and biology, But even more so, when we come to truths about the human person and finally about God, we're participating in some way in the person of Jesus, in Jesus Christ, because he is in the end of the truth. And so whatever subject that we're teaching, we want to embrace that and bring our students to the truth of what we're teaching them. That's the purpose of the teacher. We don't want to lose that. So regarding truth, we are firm believers that Jesus in the end is the truth. The way, the truth, and the life, he tells us. We also hear in the Gospel of John, the truth will set you free. So by bringing our students to the truth, indeed we're bringing them to freedom as well. And this is so necessary. Freedom, and then of course we know why God gives us freedom, and that's to love. We can't make them love. We can lead the horse to water, but you can't make the horse drink. So we want to bring our students, and I think it's important for us to know our limitations as well. We want to bring them to the truth. We want to bring them to the truth about the different subjects they study, and especially the important subjects of creation, of man, but then especially of God. So this is important. One more thing that I'd like to mention is our patron saint. Our patron saint is John Paul II. And I remember it was almost like a Zechariah moment when this name was not proposed. At the time, it was before we started the college. And we were calling it Our Lady of Mount Carmel Junior College. And we've been calling it that for years as we were preparing to open up. And in one of the meetings, Father Mark Wendling, sort of like I said in a Zechariah moment, said, it will be called John Paul II Junior College. And so that was, I think, providential. John Paul II is a saint for our times. And yes, he encompasses St. Thomas. He was a great Thomas. He studied at the Angelicum University. So he knows Thomas very well. And yet he was a lover of truth. He wrote The Splendor of Truth. He wrote Fides et Ratio. And so he knows all these things. He wrote a theology of the body. And so I think that we need to really think about also our patron saint and what he has given to us for our time in a special way. Bringing together what so many other saints had said, Augustine, Aquinas, other saints, and then giving them to us in a way that can speak then to our students and to the modern world in a lot of ways. And so I want to thank God for that witness of John Paul II and of giving Father Mark that inspiration of calling this school John Paul II Junior College. I hope that these little excerpts were helpful. You can comment on them, we can discuss them a little more, but that was sort of the reason why we founded the college years ago now, 7-8 years ago, and why we continue to support the college. We want our kids to come to the truth so that the truth can set them free and can live the fullness then of their humanity, of their faith, and in the end become saints. That's what we're all called.